So the bottom line, finishing up with this one example, was that the length of call apparently correlates with the fitness of the offspring. So females choosing males with longer calls were choosing males that were contributing a better set of genes for fitness to that particular environment. And there's a variety of theories about how mate choice works. This is just one of, trust me, lots. But it seems that in a number of occasions, some trait of the male seems to link to overall male health. And the females choosing those males are choosing the males that are going to give the best set of alleles to their offspring. So somehow it seems to reflect something along the lines of good genes. Just going through these illustrations. Okay, so then you'd think, all right, so why don't all the quote-unquote bad alleles or less effective alleles just get removed? What keeps genetic variation in population? And here the last part of the chapter gets into some of the mechanisms that keep genetic variation, that maintain genetic variety within a population. Now the first is diploidy. And as you remember, diploid cells are what? Cells that had contributions from two parents leading to a 2N state. Well, diploidy maintains genetic variation in the form of hidden recessive alleles. So think of all the heterozygous organisms we've seen examples of where there may be a dominant trait that you see in the phenotype, but they're carrying the recessive alleles. And when you did that experiment in the laboratory and you had the different combinations of parents, and when you were doing that example with the sickle cell, you noticed that if you had the right pairings, that the recessive alleles that were lethal when both manifested in an offspring, but if you just had the one copy of that allele at the parent, you could see it keep going through several generations. So again, just finishing that last point, so sometimes just by hanging out in the heterozygotes, you'll see those recessive alleles stick around. Now, balancing selection is interesting. Selection itself may actually preserve variation. There are examples of organisms where two or more forms in a population persist, and I didn't get a photograph to put in here, but there's examples of even garter snakes. There's a type of garter snake out on the west coast where they're polymorphic. There's multiple forms that each of which works well in the environment, so you actually see balancing selection, stable frequencies of two or more phenotypes in one population. So this could also include things like the heterozygote advantage and frequency-dependent selection. So these next two things we're talking about are forms of balancing selection. Now, heterozygote advantage, this is something that I mentioned in the population genetics lab when we were doing those exercises. The heterozygote advantage occurs when heterozygotes have a higher fitness than do either of the homozygotes, either the homozygous dominant or the homozygous recessive individuals. Natural selection will tend to maintain two or more alleles at that locus. In the example that you saw in the laboratory, the sickle cell allele causes mutations in hemoglobin, but the resulting change in shape of the cell confers resistance to malaria, allows greater survival to malaria. Now, the homozygotes, okay, if we look at this distribution map of where malaria caused by this particular organism is found, look at the frequencies of the allele where you have the spotted area, that's where you find the malaria. Notice how the sickle cell allele has higher frequencies in these areas where you also find the malaria.